And I'll go on to my next story. Mormon sex abuse hotline fails again. I am really, really upset about this story. And the more I listened to it, the more I found out about it, the more upset I was. And this was one of the reasons, the other reason I called John DeLynn, because this happened. I think he sort of stumbled into this when he was interviewing this guy named Riley Davis, who was a seminary teacher who apparently quit recently within the past week of this recording. And Riley Davis starts talking about when, as a seminary teacher, he saw a kid who talked to him and he saw all the red flags of abuse that's going on in her home. And his natural training, because he had been a regular school teacher before becoming a seminary teacher, he knows he's a mandatory reporter, but he goes to his materials. He knows the first thing, and he's got to call that damn hotline, the church hotline, which he calls, says what's going on, and the person tells him not to report. The person tells him not to report. The lawyer at the end of the line told him not to report it. He's not even a bishop. He's not a stake president. There could not even be the remotest hint of clergy penitent privilege involved here. And yet a lawyer is telling him not to report. And so we get a few more details. I'm just furious about this. This happened 3 years ago. Okay. And the reason I'm curious about it is because you know that Bisbee, Arizona case, the Adams case, where the bishops, plural, in sequence, called the hotline and were told not to report, even though Arizona law gave them the option of reporting. They were lied to. They were lied to by those disgusting, disgraceful attorneys like Curtin McConkie who are manning this hotline. They were lied to. These guys should be disbarred. And then they should be put in prison for telling people not to report abuse because they don't give a damn about their members. All they care about is their bottom line. Okay, I'm sorry. That's my soapbox. We'll see. I was going to say all that at the end, but I got on a roll. Let's look at this, okay? This is what it looks like over there at Mormon Stories. This is a 4 hours and 38-minute interview with Riley Davis. Resigned as a CES instructor. Last week is the name of it. And then John DeLynn, when he saw what he had, he excerpted this other piece, which is about 46 minutes long as part of that 4.5 hour interview. But this is where he tells the story. We're just going to play the first 7 minutes and 21 seconds. That's the clip of this 46-minute video. And then I'll flesh it out from there. Bill, can you put this at 1.5 speed? I think you can. Let me know if you can. Yes, you can. Thank you. And I do that because there's people who've already seen this. You can understand it quite easily at 1.5 speed, at least I can. And I encourage you to go to Mormon Stories and watch the rest of this.
The other big blow to me was I knew the complicated past history. I did not know our history with abuse reporting in the church.
How'd you start learning about that?
Well, part of it was firsthand in my experiences with Curtin McConkie. And then...
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I had an incident in my class where it seems like sometimes management or supervisors make it seem like the most effective seminary teachers are the ones that can make students open up and be most vulnerable in class, which can be really problematic. You end up discussing a lot of things in a seminary class. And I remember, I don't know what it was, but we were sharing hard things that Christ has helped us overcome. And a girl raised her hand and started sharing a situation with her parents that sent up all the red flags, like not okay, something like this needs to be reported. And so like usual, as everyone's leaving the classroom, I'm outside, I pull her aside outside and I'm like, hey, question, thank you for sharing that, right? Have you told anyone else about this? And she said, well, I told my aunt, because what it sounded like was really intense neglect and abuse, right? And so I just let her know, hey, I care about you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad your aunt knows. I am required by law to report anything like this. And the girl actually seemed pretty supportive. She was like, I get it. You can report this.
Wait, are LDS seminary teachers in Utah, do they conceptualize themselves as being mandatory reporters? That would surprise me.
No, I don't think they do on large scale. I did because That's what I was a public educator before.
And they are school
Yes,
teachers.
absolutely. And
Okay,
actually adults
got
in
it.
Utah, adults,
Yeah,
period,
right.
are mandatory reporters.
Okay.
And so
It's not the Mormon Church taught you as a seminary teacher.
that was not.
You were a mandatory reporter.
No, in fact,
Yeah.
in fact, I later went into my office and did what I was trained to do, which is to call the church helpline.
Yeah.
So she actually seems pretty supportive. So I just kicked into my educator role. Hey, I've got to report this. Thank you so much. And we're here for you, whatever. And she seems pretty supportive. Like, yeah, you're fine. Thank you for caring about me and calling it in. And so the thing is, instead of calling DCFS, as all church leaders and employees are programmed to do, I immediately open my phone and it's my first time having to call the abuse hotline, because we're taught immediately if anyone says anything like that to call Curtin McConkie, right? We're not told that it's Curtin McConkie, it's just the abuse helpline, right? But I call them and I report it, and the lawyer on the other side of the line is like, well, thank you so much for calling. It doesn't seem like we'll have I don't think DCFS would have a good enough case to actually open an investigation on this, so don't call it in. And I kind of paused. I was like, so wait, I don't have to call it in? He's like, oh no, don't call it in. And so I'm like, okay. And I hang up and I'm just like dumbfounded. I'm like, what do I do? Because literally from the get-go, from the time she raised her hand, I knew that I had to call this. Like the educator, pre-seminary teacher in me is like, I've got to call this in. It's my responsibility. And then I get told by the helpline, don't. So then I'm frantically searching online. Okay, who's a mandatory reporter in Utah? And I find out, yes, I absolutely am. Anything the church wants with priest penitent privilege. This is not some penitent person confessing to me.
Victim.
This is a victim coming to me.
Yeah.
And so any argument for, oh, you don't have to, doesn't apply here. And I'm like, I'm a flipping mandatory reporter and they're telling me not to report. And so I'm just kind of racked with guilt, because at this point, this was 3 years ago. I'm still very in the boat. Like, I feel very bad going against church authority. So I pull open our emergency response guide for seminaries and institutes. And I'm like, well, I'll go through and see if there's some sort of leeway for me to report this. But what I find in our under the topic abuse in our emergency response guide, it says, to protect confidentiality, never, highlighted in red, I didn't highlight that, in red, never discuss specific instances or allegations of abuse except as directed by the helpline or legal area counsel. So I'm like, I literally can never, this is supposed to die with me right here. This girl said she's in this situation that I don't want her to have to keep enduring. And then it goes on to say, and it even seems like our policy used to kind of teach teachers to prevent reporting if possible. It says, when it appears that a student might talk to a teacher about a personal or family involvement with abuse, the teacher should first explain that he or she is required to report allegations of all types. I explained that after she had confessed to me, right? I explained, hey, I'm going to have to report this. But this almost seems like preemptively try to get them not to report. If it even seems like they're going to report to you, you need to hop on and say, hey, whoa, I'm required to report this, and see if that'll stop it. But then it says teachers should never try to assume the role of bishop or branch president. He did ask me to reach out to her bishop and stuff, but a bishop is not a counselor, is not a social worker, is not qualified or trained to handle something like that. It says, do not discuss or report the matter with anyone unless directed to do so by the helpline or legal counsel. Then at the bottom, it says about how we're not supposed to fill out an incident report or take notes or write anything down about this. So I'm looking at this policy and I'm like, hey, I can't write anything. I can't talk to my supervisor. I can't talk to the counselors down the street. This is supposed to stay with me, according to what Curtin McConkie just told me. I eventually couldn't handle that, just my conscience. And so I eventually go and talk to the school counselor and say, this is what she said to me and everything. And the school counselor just looks at me and says, you're going to report this, right? I'm like, well, I don't know if I technically can. And she's like, you need to report this. She said it to you. And so that empowered me. So I was like, okay.
By the way, what occurs to me on this listening is that if indeed he's not supposed to tell anybody about this or make any written record of it other than call the hotline, then that part of the handbook that says, if it looks like they're going to tell you something and report something, then you need to preemptively tell them that anything they say to you, you have to report. That's a lie. You're not going to report anything unless report strictly means only calling the hotline. It doesn't mean calling the cops or DFS, which I think is Department of Family Services in Utah.
I think keeping records is the best thing you can do in these situations to protect you, to protect the victim. If this does go, you should have these conversations written down. I'm deeply disturbed by a faith that built its foundation upon keeping good records, but now in the modern moment, it doesn't want its general authorities keeping journals anymore. It doesn't want anybody handling abuse reports to keep records. It doesn't want records of any. The help hotline, when you call, when they get done with your phone call, they dispose of records so that way they can't get.
They don't. It's a lie. We find out that's a lie. That's a freaking lie. And Bill is right, because they swore In the Bisbee, Arizona, the Adams case, there is a witness who swore that there were no records to give over to the other side in response to their request for production, because all documents, all notes at the other end of the hotline are destroyed at the end of every day. That's a lie. Now, let me show you something here. We're not going to play any more of this. Once again, please go listen to it yourself. It's incredible. I'm just going to synopsize what happens in the next almost 40 minutes in there. So going from the top, though. 1, Curtin McConkie told Riley Davis not to report child abuse to government authorities. Number 2, Riley Davis is not a bishop or a stake president or anybody the church could argue has a clergy penitent privilege with the child reporter. 3, the child is not a perpetrator confessing a sin, but a victim reporting a crime. So again, the clergy penitent privilege does not apply. There was absolutely no basis for this lawyer, this shyster lawyer, to direct him to not contact government authorities about this case. And yet that's what happened. 4, Riley Davis called the hotline again over a different incident a year or more later. Hey, this is new stuff. And spoke to a different attorney. The hotline told him to go ahead and report it to authorities. Police were already involved in this case. We don't know if that had anything to do with the difference in the directive, but he did note that the second time he called, talked to a different lawyer about a different instance, a year and a half later or so. The original incident being 3 years ago. The second time he was told, go ahead and call it in to authorities. Now, number 5, after finishing the second report, Riley Davis asked the hotline attorney, the second lawyer he's talked to, why Riley had been told not to report on the first incident. This second attorney says to him, we always tell people to report, but that he would go back and check the file. Now, if that were true, that they always tell people to report, they wouldn't need to have a freaking hotline, would they? No, just call 911. So that is obviously not correct. Number 6, after reviewing the file, the hotline attorney, the second lawyer, calls Riley, tells Riley, you must be mistaken. We actually told you to report the earlier incident. And Riley's going, what? What? The second attorney saying, it's right here in the file. You were told to report the earlier incident.
Who has a record and who doesn't if that goes to court? We have a file that said we told you to report, and and at the time we told you not to keep a record, so you won't be able to prove or at least even argue that we told you to not report it.
Some lawyer should just be kicked in the nuts over and over again. And yeah, I'm talking to you. Did you want to say something, Rebecca?
No, I just think that obviously when he was told not to report, it caused him great mental distress. He talked it over with the school counselor. You don't get that wrong. You don't misunderstand something so completely opposite.
Because he's asking for the clarification in the first phone call.
Yep.
Disgusting.
Number 7, Riley Davis knows this is not true. What does he know is not true? That he was told not to report it because he was initially shocked at the advice to not call authorities. And he took steps to clarify it with the first hotline attorney. 8, Riley Davis asked to see his file. This was a masterstroke, since he is the client of the hotline attorney. And if you're the client, you got a right to see your file. Absolute right to see your file. The second hotline attorney sets up a Zoom call and displays the entire file to Riley Davis. This showed the original email, which for some reason said that Riley Davis had been told to report the first incident. So it appears that, number 1, the abuse hotline is still telling callers to not report child abuse, even to seminary teachers who are mandatory reporters. And in there, he said he was in the junior high school, which I'm guessing means that this might have been 9th graders. This might have been a 9th grade girl. Number 2, the LDS Church lied when they said, as part of their defense in the Bisbee, Arizona case, that they destroy all notes and papers relating to abuse hotline calls at the end of every day. They obviously keep the files if they can retrieve them over a year later And finally, number 3, the LDS Church, through its lawyers, is changing documents contained in their files to make it say the church said to report when the church said not to report. This is why I think this is so explosive, why it's such a bombshell story, and why it needs to be repeated as often as possible and on as many platforms as possible. And I want to thank John DeLynn for understanding that and giving me his gracious courtesy permission to play that 7-minute and 21-second clip.